Welcome to today's session. Uh, my name is Rami, for those of you who don't know me, which is probably most of you. And today we'll talk a little bit about freeing up your resources, fueling your growth with Workday. We'll give you a bit more context throughout the session today to make sure that we're all aware of how things will go down. As you can see, or as you will see later, we don't really have any slides. Kind of save you from all the slide decks that you will see throughout the masterclasses. Instead, we have customers and partners here to just have a more like a, I would say, podcast vibe to it or an interview vibe to it. So just most of the things you will hear today will come from the panelists instead of slides. And for those of you who don't know Workday, which I do hope is less people than those who don't know me, Workday is the market-leading AI platform that brings together your finance, HR, and planning data into one single scalable platform and really streamlines and automizes your processes. Thank you, ChatGPT, at this point. Right. So why are we having this session today? Very transparently said, whenever we work with and I'm leading the tech vertical at Workday, so we work with a lot of tech startup scale-ups and also more, let's say, traditional tech companies. There's really, regardless of the, let's say, business model, the culture, the business setup, there's always one thing in common, and this is something that we want to discuss today. And those two scenarios are basically one, the idea that you need to consolidate your system landscape. And maybe you will be able to emphasize for that, but we have a lot of customers who come to us and say, hey, we grew historically through acquiring single point solutions, and then, which do great for what they're supposed to do, but at some point, fundamentally, they understand that, it's not really scalable in the long term, right? 3 to 5 years, if you know that there's complexity coming or growth, this is the one use case, and then the other use case is more around the younger, more agile companies who are about to witness growth or are anticipating growth in complexity and standing in front of the decision to go with the single point best of breed solutions or make this one last change towards Workday's platform. That's kind of the context that I want to give. And with me, I have some amazing panelists, and without further ado, I would say let's get started. Maybe to make this a little bit more personal, let's start with some easy get-to-know questions for the round. And Jeff, I'll start with you. Maybe, who are you? Where are you from? What's your social security number? Right? What's your biggest fears in life? Just some personal stuff.
Snakes. Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Nothing comes close to that. They're terrifying. Anyone who likes them's a weirdo. Just get
100%
that
agree.
on the table right away. So Jeff Henry, originally from Canada, been in Germany for a few years working in the startup and scale-up space here. I'm an accountant who focuses on ERPs. So I picked the two sexiest parts of finance and just really nailed right in on those. So what I do is help companies make that choice and implement the system. I've been doing that for years now for every ERP under the sun. Right now I'm working with a company called Blacklane, Berlin-based, scale up, pretty large, operating around the world, and helping them do that and make sure that everything is running smoothly.
Thank you, Jeff. Danisa, do you want to continue?
Sure. So my name is Danica. I'm originally from Croatia, and I've been working with Workday I actually counted this year on LinkedIn, I think it was 11 years total. Out of that, there was about 5 or 6 years on the HR side, and then 5 years now I've been working on the more tech side as a product owner currently for Flix. So me and my team were responsible for helping Flix in its growth journey, which if you've attended Daniel's session earlier, you may have heard a little bit about. So we take care of the HR systems landscape. We grow that to help the business grow further. And in my free time, I am growing my first child. So there's that tidbit as well. I grow things.
Congrats. Wasn't aware. Yeah, then I conclude. My name is Malte. I'm based in Hamburg. I am a finance guy at heart, now senior manager at PwC, and I'm leading transformation projects such as EPM projects, ERP projects, have supported, for instance, also Lina X, who are also here today, formerly then acquired by SAP on the growth journey, building up their SaaS reporting, and this is what I'm doing, let's say, out of my role at PwC.
Thank you, Maite. Thank you for the introduction. Let's get Brian tuned it. That's the last slide you will see. Promise. um, so maybe we'll stay with you, Jeffrey, in just a second. Maybe to give the audience a little bit more clarity on who is Blacklane, what was the starting point, what is happening right now, maybe what is the goal, especially from a startup perspective, more on the operational side, but also maybe even strategically something that you can share with us.
Sure, absolutely. So Blacklane's been in business for a little over 10 years. Their focus is to make high-end luxury travel available to everybody. So airport transfers, city-to-city transfers. It's like Uber for limousines is the way that I like to explain it to most people. And so they operate around the world, have been scaling that way more and more with a lot of strategic partnerships. They partner with Emirates Airlines. So if you buy a first class ticket, you get a certain number of miles with a Blacklane transfer. So to the airport, you're in first class service, flying there and leaving the airport, you get taken care of. And so strategically, they've been growing and growing and growing. And as you start, you start with one model, and then once you reach a certain size, when you operate in different markets, now localization becomes a key thing. Regulations become a lot more difficult once you start having real money flowing through, your business. And so that's part of the reason why, we looked at Workday was we need something that's going to be able to grow with us as we anticipate, the next few years, pretty significant growth.
Thank you, Jeff. And then maybe a similar question to you, Danisa. I mean, Flix is probably a bit more mature on the timeline if we look at where you are, but maybe just where did Flix start? What is kind of the most prominent topics that you have on top of mind, both from operational and strategic point of view?
Mm-hmm. So we rolled out Workday back in 2018, and in the beginning we kind of focused on the core modules, and then we grew from there, which I think is the typical way that these things work. So you kind of lay the groundwork for your typical HR operations, and then whether you want to to grow further the feedback element, as we did. So we went with feedback and we went with performance. It was really a linear growth, I would say, but also in the background we did do a lot of adjustment of processes as time goes by, because when you do kind of have this growth and you have new countries launching and you have new legislations and new legal things that you need to take into account, then there's obviously a change in your HR systems landscape. And so what we're focusing on now is kind of adjusting what we have and expanding that to fit some of the newer business areas and ventures that we're diving into. So specifically Flix Train, that means a whole lot of adjustment of our internal processes to fit the new workforce, to fit kind of a different group of people who will be joining us in the future. And so on one side, we want to really kind of have a standard approach, but also we want to customize that to fit different countries, different employee populations. And so it's always a balance between those two.
I think a lot of the times when we talk to start and scale ups, which I would still consider Flix to be to a certain degree, a lot of the HR teams work quite admin heavy, right? So a lot of the tasks that they have on a day-to-day basis is kind of taking care of all the employees, all of their self-service tasks that are not self-service at the moment. And it sounds like a lot of this has been optimized for you, and it also sounds like you're much closer to actually the business right now and working strategically. Would you agree with that? And maybe you can elaborate on that as well.
I would definitely agree with that. In the beginning, when I joined Flix, I joined on kind of the HR side of things. So it was it was an HR ops role. And I remember back then it was very heavy with a lot of admin tasks. So payroll was very manual, reporting was very manual, absence management was very manual, especially in some of the countries where, at some point you used to use Excel. You used to still kind of have approval flows through email, which was like thinking back to that now, wild world. And so the more we automated the things, the more we brought in structures, we brought in global processes, we brought in a way to kind of do things in a standard manner, the admin workload significantly reduced. And I remember that was such a shift from, taking a couple of, I would say even days to prepare for payroll to just doing it in a couple of hours every month. And already that is a huge opportunity right there that we managed to achieve. Yeah.
Thank you, Danisa. And then because most people in the crowd don't know, Malte, who is PwC? I was kidding. We'll come to you in just a second. We were talking about, and I think I want to stay with you there, Anissa, because you already started talking about it, is obviously this whole journey. Maybe we'll romanticize it if you look into it from retrospect, but there's probably challenges along the line, right? Some pitfalls, some traps. And maybe the question is, what is your point of view? What is maybe some antidotes or some cautiousness you want to give away to the crowd today?
That's a really good question. So I'll take it back to the example of absences. So as I said, originally from Croatia, which smaller market, and I used to work in HR there as well. And they had this system where we had a separate tool for vacation days, and we were just implementing Workday in all countries. This was not for Flix, this was for a different company. And I remember one of the challenges that we struggled with was, how do you implement a global standard absence management process, but also keep in mind the kind of specifics of the local market? One thing is the legal side of things. Obviously, there's different kind of rules and regulations on who needs to approve an absence request, what kind of documentation needs to be submitted with a parental leave, for example. But then there's also how are smaller markets different from larger markets, where people are more used to maybe coming up to their local HR teams and just kind of tapping them on the shoulder and saying, hey, I have a question. It's also a big mindset shift to pay attention to when you're rolling out a globalized, standardized process. So there's always the balance between what you can standardize and globalize and where you need to adjust for local needs and requirements there.
Absolutely. And then Jeffrey, maybe also just from your perspective, right? And maybe more so from, you started at Blackline, you've seen kind of the processes, how they're flowing. You've been in the startup ecosphere for a long time. You've seen different types of startups, different types of challenges. And maybe to reflect on that, maybe you can give us a little bit about your experience of the traps that you see, the issues that one might have if you work in silos, if there is no real processes behind it. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so yeah, again, I've seen a lot of different things in Berlin in my couple of years there. I worked with Gorillas for a short period of time, and I think we all know what happened there. That's a pretty widely known one. And so I think pitfalls, they're plentiful in this space. You tend to grow quicker than your system's landscape. You get strategic customers and they're like, we need you to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, great. We'll move mountains to do that. But that usually means you're doing stuff manually, right? Which is great. But then you get the next customer and they also need something done manually. And then you start building up the core, clients of yours are all special processes, all have to be done manually. Means you have to bring people in because there's no system for that. And that's one of the biggest pitfalls I've seen is, instead of saying like, okay, we need to tackle this from a system standpoint and address it early so we have something that can, adapt to these requests, we adapt to the requests as a group and we push that out. And sometimes you push it out years and years and years. And the next thing you know, you have this tech stack and this infrastructure that's held together with tape. And, someone clicks and, puts a comma in the wrong spot. And the next thing, you can't extract any information from the system. You don't know how you're doing. Stuff's being lost. Good luck passing an audit, all that stuff. So that's really the biggest pitfall I see is, you rush to get things just working to just meet this one need without any thought of, okay, we're good today. What about in 6 months? What about with the next customer? For me, that's where I really see the struggles.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And then Malte, you've been working with a lot of different companies and with a lot of different growth trajectories, and you've probably navigated some of those pitfalls and traps in those projects that you have with those customers. What are the biggest challenges you see, and maybe also some antidotes to those challenges when it comes to, this type of change in the organization?
Yeah. So it seems, Jeff, that you have stolen my speaker notes, because I can only emphasize, I think most companies really focus on front-end growth. So how can I growth in my top line? Maybe neglecting or ignoring the fact that also the back office needs to accompany the growth, or at least be able to absorb that growth. And this is what we typically see, so that the back office, so finance, HR, the FP&A function, are not able to accommodate this growth, and that's the one thing. And if we talk about the ambition, maybe also of those functions, it's most often the case that they can actively contribute to this growth trajectory, and without, let's say, aligning the strategy from those functions to the corporate strategy, I think this is kind of a mismatch that is not playing out in the end. And then we do have all those typical cases. Systems are not talking to each other, people are not talking to each other, there's shadow reporting and whatsoever. And this is kind of also hindering new requests, new requirements from payroll, maybe also statutory reporting requirements, because you're expanding to different countries. For sure, requirements are different country by country. And this is, I think, something that is typically seen. Therefore, I think that is something on the one hand side, working out a proper ambition level for those finance functions, for those HR functions on the one hand side, but also really taking care of the tech stack and consolidating things, removing redundancies. Yeah, that's basically it.
Thank you, Martin. I want to stay on that topic for just a little bit more, because a lot of the times what we see is that, a lot of the start and scale ups live in the gray areas of a compliance, right? So it's kind of like more uncomfortably than comfortably, but a lot of these scale scenarios are heavy on compliance, right? And whether it's just avoiding fines and penalties, whether it's making sure that your data is secure, whether it's just safeguarding your business operations, whatever the use case is, it seems like that's a huge topic in terms of growth. And then, Malte, this is a question to you. How can companies compensate for that? How is it that, and maybe even from your experience, how has Workday helped them in those cases?
So what we typically do is so our aim is always to standardize, to simplify things. And what we've done, because obviously PwC is kind of heavy into audit, we know accounting by heart, I'd say. So what we try to do is to not ask the client, hey, how do you want to do your accounting in Germany, in Switzerland? I don't know, because we are pretty sure we know how to do it, and we probably know it better than the client. Not saying that this is kind of a thing that we are smarter than the client, but most often the functions are not that mature. People in the startup ecosystem are rather young, rather unexperienced. Therefore, we bring this kind of expertise, this kind of standardization, this kind of best practice already to the table, and are then discussing, and I think you also mentioned that, based on this kind of template, how should we adapt to the business model of Flink or the business model of Blacklane, because that is what is needed. Because, for instance, when we talk about steering, probably, Jeff, you know that better for Blacklane, what is specifically the growth initiatives, what are the strategies, what are the growth initiatives in the end. So that is something we need to bake in, but based on a solid foundation, I'd say.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I see whenever I work with you as PwC is that's just your bread and butter, right? That's exactly what you're here to do. And I think, especially the started scale ups, they usually see the front end as more relevant, right, when it comes to growth. But then having someone who is more experienced in scaling the back end and making sure that everything is compliant is usually something that we really see you supporting us with. And then maybe with you, Danisa, how important is it from an HR perspective, right? Where did you come from in terms of compliance, and how is maybe Workday supporting you today with staying compliant?
I would mention two specific things there. So on one side, when you're kind of at the beginning, there's no real clear access management in place, I would say. And that was quite a manual thing to set up, because you kind of have your employee data in shared drives, you have it in emails that start all over the place. And it's really tricky to get the access right in terms of who can see these documents. Is it HR? Is it the manager? Is it the employee itself? And so automating that and making sure that at any moment the data is really protected, that was a big thing for us. And certainly the Workday, security fundamentals is a huge thing, or the security setup. And it's one of those things that is a kind of basic requirement, I would say, in the day and age of GDPR and stuff. And the second thing I would like to mention is also business processes and how those are set up. So I mentioned a little bit about approval flows already when I was talking about absences. It goes further than that because there's legal requirements that maybe you don't necessarily think of, and this is where consultancies come in to really support with what is required in terms of a 4I principle for some of these changes that you make, or you have to have a segregation of duties, as it's so called, where it's not just one person making a compensation change or just one person kind of making something that could impact financial things further down the line, but you need to make sure you have these safeguards in place so that you're compliant with various laws and regulations.
Thank you, Denisa. And then Jeffrey, maybe more generalistic speaking, maybe from a finance perspective. I mean, you've worked with a couple of different companies. You've implemented different types of ERPs. You've shared some of the stories that you're probably not willing to share on stage, which is okay.
I'll share some of them. There's some fun ones.
But yeah, well, please go ahead. But in your experience, how has compliance and the lack of compliance been something that was major in terms of pitfalls and kind of dangers to the business?
Sure. I mean, there's two guarantees in life. It's death and taxes. They're coming for you, right? And so compliance is critical because the government's always getting their money, right? So making sure that you have everything where it's supposed to be is absolutely critical. If you open a new markets, making sure that you're, is e-invoicing required? Are all these things that are there that a system can help you with, or at least provide you the information to do, to be compliant, is absolutely critical. The next part after that is, in the startup world, when you start bringing in outside money, is audit, right? Whoever's giving you that money wants to make sure that it's going where you say it is and all that. So to be compliant with accounting standards and, have an audit that's not going to last for 6 months and cost you pretty much everything that you raised, you need everything to be where it's supposed to be. You need processes to be outlined. You need segregation of duties. You need approval flows. You need those things to go from, the company where there's a handful of people where everyone can do everything, and you need that because there's fires here and there. You need that to put them out and to keep moving forward. But then once you start to get to a point where you have a base, you need to start, having HR only look at HR data, because if finance can see stuff, then, information can get out. If non-finance people can see pay rates, that's a huge problem, right? Like opens you're up to litigation. It does all these things. So compliance controls at a certain point become absolutely critical to even keep the lights on.
Thank you. And I mean, that's some of the things that a lot of start and scale ups will start to think about. Again, I think a lot of the stuff that will happen stays in the gray zones or the gray areas of it all. But I think especially in when you're funded, when you're well funded, when you have a clear ambition or strategic goal to grow internationally, I think it just becomes increasingly important. And that's what we're seeing working with start and scale ups as well. I'll stay with you just for another second, Jeff. Now that we talked about compliance, and I was lucky enough to work with you while we were at Blacklane, what I've witnessed from Blacklane was that, the companies seem to be extremely agile and really good at just planning different scenarios and making sure that you kind of have different ways of growing.
Sure.
And how do you plan for the future while focusing on all of the stuff that we talked about, right? Compliance, it's growth that is, what would you say, almost scalable to a certain degree, right? And how does it also, maybe from a financial perspective, impact safe?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the big ones is, Blacklane's had a strategic partnership with, the PIF for Saudi Arabia. So the being sure that you're compliant within the KSA, right? This Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They require e-invoicing. They require a physical presence. There's all of these boxes that you have to check to operate within that market. We will, as a business, we want to grow. We want to target this market because it's a growing market and it has the thing. Okay, great. We know that we have these barriers to entry. How do we make sure that we're ready for that, right? How do we make sure that we can invoice properly, that we're not losing out on VAT? Because, if you're not properly registered VAT, you're going to have to pay your suppliers that, but there's no way to recoup it. So it's those sorts of things that, like, this is a market I want to grow in. What do I need to know about that market? Looking at, all the little items that could make or break your business there. If you miss one of those things, I mean, you could be looking at, 6-7 figures worth of tax charges if you get something wrong in that setup, or you're not able to produce the data in a timely fashion.
Yeah. And I mean, maybe it's also interesting to hear from Flix, as again, you're probably a bit more further down the scaling lane, I would say. And also maybe working with Workday for the past 6, 7, 8 years, and I'm not even sure how long, but it's been a while, longer than all of us here at Stage, I think, except for you, maybe, Malte. How did it help? I mean, what I took away is, right, global standard processes, right, being able to have all those regulations, have the localizations. How did Workday and the software supported you in scaling into different countries and making sure that all the regulations are in place?
So one obvious example is kind of reporting and headcount reporting. And if you don't have one tool in place where you have like all the data, it gets really, really tricky. And as you're kind of growing and expanding and, you kind of need to report on a lot of things to many different stakeholders, whether that's internal, external, government agencies, etc. And getting those numbers on how many people do we actually have in all of our countries can be really tricky if you don't have one source of truth. Let's put it that way. And a recent thing that we are currently working on is rolling out absences, as in leave of absence, in all of our countries, because we have realized is that without having one source of information on who is on leave is making headcount planning and also budgeting quite complex, because you rely on this data further down the line. And if you don't have it, that means you're putting manual effort, and there's the opportunity for mistakes to happen, obviously, when you don't have kind of one place to go for all this. So we're kind of focusing on doing that in all of our different countries right now. And it's, I think, going to make quite a big impact on, some of these internal and external reportings that we have going on.
Thank you, Denisa. And then Malte, maybe from your perspective, right, just working with a lot of different companies and more from a holistic point of view, and maybe from just how PwC supports all of those companies when it comes to rolling out software into different countries, making sure that all the regulations are fit. What is your POV on this?
So I can only emphasize what you guys both said. So I think it's about really investing a lot of thought also into the system in terms of, I'd say, so using all the system capabilities that are already there, plus then also trying to automate and automate, simplify, standardize as much as possible, not only, let's say, system-wise, but also with the organization itself, and then to also use this kind of potential to scale. So I think there's a lot of capabilities already out of the box, plus then everything that is put in by implementation project about certain considerations regarding rollouts and so on. So I think that is, I guess, key to then be able to scale and to adapt also to new challenges, being it divestitures, being it M&A.
Understood. What I want to do as kind of the last question is more of a hypothetical game than anything else. And before we kind of wrap up and give some takeaways to the crowd is, imagine, and Denisa, I want to start with you because you've been working with Workday for a while now. Imagine back in the day, Flix wouldn't have changed anything from the, let's say, previous setup. Work with me. What would happen, and what would Flix look like today?
I love imagining dystopian futures. It's wonderful. You mentioned this one already, Jeff, when you said systems. What was it? Held up by tape? I think that was, yeah.
Yep.
So I can definitely imagine that that's what the future would have looked like, because it would have been kind of add-on on add-on on add-on. I mean, it's, you would have probably one or like one HR system in one country, then you have another one in another one, then you have different tools for payroll, you have different rules for tools for time tracking, you have each country maybe doing their own kind of performance management process. I mean, merits and all of that kind of also goes out the window because you can't really consolidate that. And what that would look like in my head is you would have dedicated teams of HR professionals within each country or maybe each business unit, depending on the population, doing basically a copied version of the same process, but in a little bit of a different way. And so the exponential growth in terms of headcount that would lead to is, like you would have, I don't know, 10 people working only on payroll for, a specific country. And I don't know, it just would, I believe, lead to also a lot of misalignment. Because imagine if you're kind of a manager and you have teams in different countries, meaning you would have different rules and different ways of doing things for your employees that are sitting in Italy, for your employees that are sitting in France. And from simply a kind of having to switch every time, thinking about, what was the process again for when I want to give Jeff in, I don't know, Berlin a raise versus Rami sitting in Paris, it just creates a lot of extra and unnecessary complexity, and that just builds on or adds on to the cost of things, not only from a financial but also from like a culture, mental capacity perspective.
So what you're saying is Workday helped you fuel your growth and save your resources?
Yes, I would say that. Yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to, that was a good transition to what we're actually talking about. And Jeff, I wanted to ask you the same question, more from a perspective of, you've recently made the change and the decision to go and mature those processes that have been maybe historically been growing into different directions. Now imagine for the next 2 to 3 years, you would have just stayed on this track. What's the outcome?
Well, I think echoing what Denise just said is it's headcount, right? It's a delayed path to profitability, because everything you wanted to do differently, you would have had to bring in people to do that. There would have been no automation, or you'd be heavily leveraging, engineering resources that are not cheap, that kind of come in, they do something, they build it, and then if they're freelancers, they leave. And then you're having to maintain that technology. You're having to bring people in. You may be building something off that, and it's not sustainable. So I think, can you do it? Yes. Is your path to profitability much slower? Absolutely, because you're going to be carrying extra headcount. You're going to be carrying additional softwares, additional licenses in different markets. That streamlined vision that everyone has for their organization, where you keep it agile and nimble, and you're able to maintain things from like a central point, that goes out the window. So now you have all these disparate resources, disparate systems, and you have to try and bring them back together at the end of the day. And so that's a pretty big feat to do that. It just means time, it means resources, it means turnover as well. And because people get tired of doing that, tired of triaging every situation, it also means that you have less time to focus on what you really wanted to do, which is grow your business, right? You don't have the resources able to just focus solely on getting new customers, expanding to new markets, innovating, because they're tied up trying to keep what you have going.
And I think, Malte, what I wanted to ask you is, and again, you've worked with hundreds of customers probably by now, and not all of them finally or ultimately made the decision to move to a more mature system. And you probably have seen some of the, let's say, outcomes of this, right? What are some of the things that you can share from experience looking at those companies that made the change versus not making the change in a timely manner?
I think there are obvious points that you also already mentioned. So increased operational costs when you don't change, a lot of maintenance, a lot of inefficiencies, a lot of redundancies. So that's for sure. The other thing, I think, Jeff, you also mentioned that you are so absorbed by doing transactional activities that you cannot dedicate your time to really value creating tasks. So that holds true for everyone who is fostering the front-end growth from a sales team that needs to work with an ERP, that is, but especially also true for the ones that are administrating the business in the back. So I think if you do not invest at least thoughts in how you want to accompany that growth, then you are lost. Maybe not in the first 2 years, but afterwards it's becoming really a aspect that is hindering you to further pursue your growth trajectory. So yeah, that's, I guess, the main point.
And thank you to all of you for that. And I think now that we kind of laid the foundation of the worst case, which I mean can be the delayed change in terms of making sure that you're profitable, that you have the right resources, doing the right stuff, meaning not necessarily admin stuff, but maybe just working strategically with a business. What I would want to know, and maybe this is something that our team can take, or the audience can take away. What are the 3 key topics when it comes to growth trajectory, right? What are the key 3 things that you want to give away to the audience today? And maybe Jeff, you want to start?
Sure. I think the main 3 points for growth that I see are, stability in your systems and your back end, room for growth. So you don't just have the best tool for today, but you have something that grows with you, and traceability. I mean, again, I'm an accountant at the end of the day. So being able to track things through your system, see where things are falling off, just helps you make sure that your business is operating the way that you think it is or the way that you want it to. So for me, those are the big 3.
Danisa, you want to continue?
Yeah, so I would say the first one for my side would be to really make sure you understand your business and your users at like kind of every step in the growth journey, because as things grow and develop, things also change. And so making sure to kind of keep on track of your knowledge and your understanding of your business and users is a key thing. And secondly, I would just say that it's also a great opportunity to kind of rethink things when you're rolling out new systems or new tools. And that's also like one of the pitfalls that I see sometimes, where it's you take an existing process and you just digitalize it. And I don't see that always works out in your favor. I would rather recommend you kind of deconstruct and then digitalize. So those would be my additions.
Thank you, Denise. And Malte, maybe you want to end us off with some of the 3 key takeaways from you.
So for me, it's really, and I think I said it multiple times, it's not, so you obviously do need a company strategy, but I think you also do need a strategy that is, let's say, trickle down to your corporate functions. That's the first thing. The second, I think, especially for finance cannot be or can be a performance driver that allows you to grow. And the last thing, I think an investment in tech is also an investment in your people, because they are able then to pursue value creating tasks. And that is always, I guess, or I hope that everyone wants to do. So rather focusing on things that are fun, things that are helpful, things that are essential, rather than just doing kind of accounting, just doing payroll and all those, rather boring stuff.
I think we're almost right on time. I want to thank you, all of you, for sharing your experiences, what you have done, what you're planning to do in the future, and thank you all for attending. Everything that was said today, we can further discuss at our booth. If you see the Snowflake Cafe, we're right there. And let's have a discussion there, see if this is something that is relevant to you. And thank you very much.